All right, cool. Thank you guys for bearing with me on the technology side of things. Dan just came to the rescue and gave me an adapter. I had to present. Some of you were here. Present my last one, like holding my laptop up like a story time, which didn't work that well. So hopefully this is going to be a lot smoother. There's a sign-in sheet going around. Not super high stakes, but put your name down so I know. Can prove that I came here to my boss. And if you guys don't hate this, come check me out at the trade show after. I am reading people's fortunes. It's a lot of fun, and they're a free coffee mug, so there's really no reason not to stop by. I do not have any more of the pocket knives that I gave out last year. I weaponized most of the school facilities people last year, and now I'm out. So if you didn't get a pocket knife, maybe next year. We'll see. This is called The New Age of Uncertainty, Prepping Your School for Catastrophe, which is a very dramatic-sounding title, I know, but it's sort of a dramatic subject. I taught a similar class last year. Some of you may have been here. I've updated it since, but let's dive in. I like this story. It's September 1st, 2021. I think this illustrates a lot of what we're going to be talking about. This is Cresskill High School. It's not here. It's out in Bergen County, New Jersey. Like I said, September 1st, 2021, which is a big deal. It's the beginning of the school year. It's not just any school year, because after a year and a half of remote learning for these kids, student body's finally set to return in person. Oh, thank you. And so people are excited, right? This is a big deal to them. They're finally getting back to normal. One example is band camp. So school hasn't started yet, but they're having band camp. And the students have prepared this like special set that they're going to play as everybody's walking into the school. It's about the theme of overcoming. So set list is, all classics. They have Don't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow, Lean on Me, I'm Still Standing. Things are going great for them. Practice is just about to wrap up, and again, it's the second to last day of band camp. They're just sounding about as good as a high school marching band can possibly sound. And then crack. There's a peal of thunder, and the rainstorm that they'd kind of been expecting is finally there. So they get off the field, they send the kids home, and they figure they will finish up tomorrow, except they do not get that chance. That rainstorm turns out to be the remnants of Hurricane Ida, and it turns out to be a real doozy. You got 7 inches of rain pounding into that school in the space of a couple of hours. That rain ends up flooding through the school's ventilation system, and it turns the entire place basically into a gross, muddy aquarium. So classrooms, offices, the boiler room, the gym. Actually, the school custodian gets trapped in the gym overnight because all this water is rushing in, and he, I think intelligently, does not want to wade through muddy, probably asbestos-filled water to get out. So he's sitting in the bleachers waiting for this to pass. So as you can imagine, that long-awaited return to the classroom that's supposed to happen does not happen. And 7 months later, when I originally looked at this, and even now, it still has not fully happened. This is almost 2 years later? They still have not fully returned to normal at the school. To paraphrase the school superintendent, he does not have a school anymore. He has a building, and he still can't do anything with it. Why is that? If we look at the micro of just what this damage looks like in a school, water flooded basically this entire building. Almost nothing was left untouched in some capacity. So there's critical building systems. You got your boiler room. That needed extensive repair. A lot of that needed to be replaced. But even like the actual supplies that you need to run a school. Your Bunsen burners for your chemistry lab, your sousaphones for your marching band. A lot of these were kind of ruined by the water damage. Flood inspectors came in after this happened, and they estimated the entire cost of repair and replacement to the school to be about $21.6 million. School has flood insurance, right? So it's covered, right? Not the case. Their cap on their flood insurance was $2 million. That just about covers the initial emergency services of extracting the water and starting to dry the structure. As far as the replacement, the repairs, all of that stuff doesn't even touch. There's a gap of over $18 million. And that's $18 million that school does not have on hand, as most schools do not. So luckily, FEMA gets involved, right? The government's involved. That's going to help. FEMA releases funds to assist with Hurricane Ida and damage specifically in this region. There's a catch, though. Those funds are only available on a reimbursement basis, meaning the school has to come up with the $18 million first and pay for this stuff before it can actually get reimbursed and made whole. And there's a state statute in New Jersey, which is probably a wise one. It prohibits the school from borrowing money without direct approval from voters. So even if the school could say, hey, we're going to borrow this money today, use it to pay our repair bills, and tomorrow FEMA is going to reimburse us, in New Jersey they cannot do that unless the voters actually have a referendum and say, yes, you can. So they have no way to raise these funds. They're not allowed to just borrow it. So the rest of the world goes back to semi-normal. They go back to school. These kids go back to Zoom to start up their school year. So even that marching band program they've been working on, they are now doing it on Zoom. And I don't know if you guys have ever attended a marching band practice on Zoom. It sounds terrible. Everybody's got their microphones muted. It's not great. So here's the question that kind of undergirds this entire presentation is, what could they have done? What could the school have done, if anything, to prevent this kind of catastrophe? They had no idea this kind of flooding was coming. They knew it was going to rain. They didn't know it was going to be this like biblical level flood in their school. They did not know that something as, innocuous as the placement of their vents was going to lead to this kind of massive damage. And in their minds, they all thought they were getting back to normal. The last thing they expected is any kind of disaster. And then nature comes knocking, foils their plans. This kind of story here is extreme, but it's not that uncommon. And in fact, research has shown, and we've kind of seen this over the past year, these sorts of disasters, really severe ones, have kind of started to happen more and more. And research about this calls it the new age of uncertainty, which is not my phrase. I know it sounds scary. For the buildings that we live and work and make our lives in. So not just the schools, but your house, your apartment, the mall, the Tim Hortons, all of these buildings, these built environment are at risk. So I'll explain a little bit what that means. We'll talk a little bit about what Crestkill could have done to make things maybe not totally fine. This is the sort of thing you can't totally prepare for, but at least make this damage not as severe. And we'll talk about the implications their story has from us, and we will hopefully walk away here with a new sense of possibility as to what you guys can do on the front lines to help. So you guys may be wondering who I am. My name is Dan Bauer. I work for a company called ServPro. Got 2 locations out here down in the South Towns, West Seneca, Lancaster. Only bring that up because all ServPros are independently owned and operated. So if you call somewhere else and you ask for Dan, they are not going to know who I am. Or they may know who I am and be really mad at me. You never know. Do you guys know what ServPro does? I know I've been in a lot of these schools before. And I don't know if anybody wants to jump in and do my job for me explaining it. Nope. Okay. So we generally get the call when things do go horribly wrong. And it doesn't have to be a major thing. It's typically water, fire, mold, biohazards, those sorts of things. So if this, are there sprinklers in here? Maybe not. That's not good. Say this room were to flood. There's a roof leak, a pipe bursts up there. We'd be the people that you would call to deal with that, basically start to finish, dry out the room, salvage what you can, throw out what you can't, rebuild it. That would be our job. And so I see a lot of this stuff firsthand. Our franchises have been at it for about 26, 27 years. I've been there about 3. So we've seen disaster strike in schools, in all sorts of places, and I can tell you that this is serious stuff. You don't have to take my word for it. So we've got this new age of uncertainty, and this is the research I wanted to show you guys. I did not come up with this idea. That is a company called PwC. They used to be called PricewaterhouseCoopers. They've since changed their name. They're one of the largest accounting firms in the world, which means they do a lot more than just balance people's books and move around ones and zeros. It's kind of their job to consult for their clients and predict the future. And they publish every single year a report that's called the Emerging Trends in Real Estate Report, which is kind of a dry title, admittedly, but it's my job to read this sort of stuff. So I dug into it. There's a lot of good information in there. Their focus is not so much on schools. It's just about buildings, real estate in general. But there's one idea in there that I think will kind of resonate with schools, with kind of anybody who's managing a building. And it's this. This is chapter 1, trend number 10, this new age of uncertainty. And given this was published last year, so some of it's a little dated, but basic idea here was that real estate, buildings, etc., generally used to be kind of predictable. If you were in commercial real estate, you could buy a building and sort of predict, okay, if I have this many people rent from me, I can make this much money, I'll pay it off in 5-10 years, and then it will start to positively produce cash flow. I mean, it's a big business, obviously. Obviously, there are surprises in any sort of lived environment. You have people come in and, stick a rag in the sink and run the sink and flood the bathroom. Or I can only think of horrible, horrible examples right now. Start a fire. I won't talk about anything too crazy. Those things happen, of course. But generally, those were things you could predict. What PwC is saying is that age of things being all that predictable has ended decisively in their terms, and a new age of uncertainty has begun, where the problems that we're going to face in buildings, running buildings, just maintaining buildings, maintaining environments for kids to learn, those problems are going to be more and more predictable, and they're going to be bigger. There are two reasons why they pointed out this trend. And again, this was published last year, so COVID was on the brain. We're hopefully beyond this, and I'm not going to get into this. I know that COVID, obviously, in schools was a big deal. Schools were not open. Students sort of suffered from that in all sorts of ways that I'm sure are still developing. But I'm going to talk about number two here. According to them, past COVID, the greatest long-term uncertainty that we're going to deal with today and tomorrow is natural disasters. There's an increasing frequency, and we don't have to argue about the cause of this, but just there's an increasing frequency of what they call 500-year events. 500-year event is literally something of such catastrophic severity that statistically it should only happen once every 500 years. There's a 0.2% chance of it occurring in any given year, which is twice a millennium. And we've started to see these things happen more and more. In 2022, there's, I believe, 5 or 6 weather events that were classified as 500-year events. Here we got really hit bad by Winter Storm Elliott. But you see across the country, tornadoes ripping through areas where typically tornadoes do not rip, wildfires, stuff like that. Again, here's an example of a wildfire in 2020, the August Complex wildfire. This was a 500-year event. Burned for 88 days, more area than the entire state of Rhode Island. Hurricane Ida, which we already talked about in New Jersey, is a Category 4 hurricane. And in 2021, it was the single costliest event in the U.S., and that includes COVID-19, caused over $75 billion in damage. Like I said, there are 5 or 6 events that qualify in this 500-year space that happened in 2022 alone. This creates a lot of that uncertainty that they're talking about in running a built environment. Our buildings are not really equipped to deal with this. Now, you might be saying, "You're so stupid, Dan. I hate you. We don't live in California. We don't live in Louisiana. This is not going to really affect us." You guys may actually remember there was a run of news articles. It was a very popular topic in January of 2020 that declared Buffalo a climate refuge. And what that means is it was a guy from Harvard, this guy named Jesse Keenan, who is doing the glamour shot on the iceberg here, who came up with this designation. And his argument's pretty straightforward. You do have places like California, Louisiana, et cetera, who are suffering the brunt of increased severe weather. They have to deal with rising sea levels. They're the ones where those areas are going to be made uninhabitable by rising temperatures. And sort of counterintuitively, you see more people moving to those areas now who may, in the near future, have to move away. But here in Western New York, we're pretty good. We've got Lake Erie, so we've got tons of fresh water. We've got resources. Nobody's going to be mad if it gets a few degrees warmer here. And we have the infrastructure to handle if there were like an influx of people coming in from these newly uninhabitable coasts, we could house them, according to this guy. It sounds like a pretty sweet deal until you ask people who actually live here. So this is Holly Buck. She works at UB's Department of Environment and Sustainability, recently quoted saying that what we're expecting to see is more extreme weather, more lake effect snow, more windstorms, flooding, heat waves, basically more of everything bad. This is Jill Jalika from Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper said something similar. Storms are getting more extreme and flashier. They have a tendency to rapidly develop and dump large amounts of precipitation in a short period of time, and many parts of our built environment have not been designed to handle these kind of storms. And this fella from UB School of Architecture, Nicholas Rakovich, listed off a bunch of reasons why we're not necessarily a refuge. Mostly that we do not have the infrastructure to deal with these things. We do not have the infrastructure to deal with a bunch of people moving here, and our buildings are super old. So we've seen significant examples of this recently. Heavy rains leading to massive flooding. That's Mineral Springs Road. This was a couple years back. Every time Lake Erie, there's a severe storm, we see continued erosion of the coastline there. We've seen buildings start to collapse or mysteriously catch on fire lately. This was July 2021, 324 Oak Street. This was basically a problem of unmitigated water damage. This building was so old and so poorly maintained that it started to collapse. The risk of this happening was determined to be so great that the city of Buffalo actually contracted a company called Eaglehawk, which is a drone building inspection company, to scan every building within the city limits for moisture issues. And then they could preemptively urge these private building owners to conduct necessary repairs and maintenance before it's too late. I can tell you from experience that nothing has come of that program at all, but they at least acknowledged that this was a problem, and that this could continue to happen. And I think the most obvious and severe indicator was Winter Storm Elliott. This is near and dear to my heart in particular because this has consumed the last 4 months of my life. This was in many descriptors considered to be a winter hurricane just because of the sheer force of the winds and the freezing temperatures, claimed upwards of 30 lives locally, and caused massive, massive amounts of flooding. Most of those were burst pipes, burst sprinkler heads. There were about $5.4 billion in insured losses across the country. Here, certainly hundreds of $millions of damage. One of the major issues with this, by the way, and I don't have this in the presentation, but I can tell you firsthand from responding to these losses, was not so much the cold temperature, but the wind. You have 70, 80 miles an hour wind banging into a lot of the older buildings that we have here. I was at ECC. ECC was a kind of a mess. It's an older building. That wind is capable of carrying those freezing temperatures into areas that previously were thought to be heated and inaccessible in these buildings. So in this case, they had multiple different leaks. The worst one was like an elbow joint that was in an attic area, way away from these windows, on the 5th floor. And it burst because it got cold and rained water down. And because the snow was also so severe and there was a driving ban, nobody was able to get there and turn it off for days. And that happened at buildings all over the place in Western New York. And anytime we have severe winds combined with this kind of low temperature, it's going to happen again and again. So, yes, these events get talked about as being once in a generation, but you would be hard-pressed to find many people who don't think this is going to happen again and again in some capacity. So are we really a climate refuge? If you compare us to California, which is always on fire, Louisiana, which is always underwater, we're doing better than them. But it doesn't mean we're not going to suffer from this increase in severe weather. There are going to be more disasters down the road. And many of those frequent issues may be relatively mundane compared to a hurricane. It's stuff like roof leaks and pipe bursts, high winds, things like that are going to affect us here. And the same problems that lead to those big issues can also lead to smaller problems as well, just more frequently. A burst pipe that basically ruins 5 floors of a historic building is bad, but the same issue could lead to a burst pipe in this classroom, and that could still be days, if not weeks, of cleaning, remediating, reconstruction, displaced students, etc. So same issues can lead to problems here. Now, I'm not saying this to scare anybody. Again, I didn't come up with that new age of uncertainty tagline, but I just more to warn people that it can be bad. So, and how bad, what's at stake? I looked into one subsection of this, which is flooding in schools. Why did I do this? According to a report from the Pew Charitable Trusts entitled Flooding Threatens Public Schools Across the Country, flooding is in fact the most costly and common natural disaster that a school is likely to face. That threat is widespread. According to the same report, the risk of school flooding is distributed widely across the United States. There are certainly higher risk areas, but no state is really safe. The Government Accountability Office, GAO, said that 1 in 5 students attend schools that were in some way affected or were federally declared had federally declared natural disasters in them in just like the 2 years that they studied. Thankfully, we're mostly displaced from that, but flooding is one of the biggest natural risks to any structure anyway. It is, aside from wind and hail claims, the most common insurance claim is going to be a homeowner's claim regarding some sort of flooding. And schools don't always file insurance claims if this happens, but it's just the most common thing that can happen in a building and really disrupt it. It's a big risk to any structure, and I'd say especially schools, because you can often have older buildings. They're difficult to maintain. There are often budget shortfalls that make it hard to keep up with even routine maintenance, and those can lead to vulnerabilities. Probably everybody here has at some point dealt with some kind of flood event, be it a burst pipe, a backed up sump pump, or they know somebody who has. At a school, it can be really bad not just for the amount of physical damage, but how it affects the entire school community. So the GAO report breaks that down into 4 aspects: the emotional, the academic, the financial, and the physical. And I won't harp on this softer stuff too much, but I do think it's important because we're in a school, and schools are here for kids, and kids get affected by this stuff. So the emotional. There's a quote from a school counselor in that study. Our school is a constant in the life of our kids. They have a lot going on in their homes. They have parents losing jobs. They have crime in their neighborhoods. School's a safe haven. When our school was destroyed, that was a huge loss. Parents have a lot of instability, but the school is a constant. Or at least schools should be a constant. And they're talking about a significant flood, but even a small amount of disruption to a kid's routine can be a threat to them. And that kind of constancy is under threat. GAO report surveyed districts that suffered major floods, like I said. All 5 districts that they really dug into said that those natural disasters caused a significant amount of trauma for students as well as burnout for staff. And we're talking about flooding, but the same exact thing can happen if there's, say, a significant fire at a school. That school's shut down, those kids are displaced. There's a lot of research out there, and this is not a new idea, but it basically supports that one of the most lingering, most persistent effects of any sort of disaster is immaterial. There's anxiety, depression, PTSD for these kids. It's an extreme example, but after Hurricane Harvey, which happened back in 2017, which is what this study looked at, it was 5 years after, and kids were still sort of reeling from that amount of disruption. It's beyond the scope of this presentation exactly to go into what the emotional effects for these kids are, but I'm sure you guys know that kids are relatively fragile. They need all sorts of mental health care. They need all sorts of care in general. They need routine, and that's exactly what's at stake emotionally when something happens. This, of course, plays into academic achievement, which I know is nobody's, certainly not my direct concern when I'm working in a school is that these kids get straight A's, but it's a learning environment. And there's a quote from a student services professional. It's impossible to detach the academic component of recovery from the social emotional. The trauma students have experienced and the changes in where they live and their ability to get to school has an impact on their learning. I can tell you from experience, I see this trend not just in primary schools like this, but in higher education, especially when you have non-traditional learners. If you have adult learners who, even for a couple of days, can't go to school because that building was flooded, there was some sort of damage, their classroom shut down, they are like 3 times as likely not to come back because of that disruption to their routine. They then have to make the decision to re-engage, to come back. So you have the emotional side directly affecting the academic side, but we'll talk a little bit more about the financial and physical impacts. I think that's a little bit more relevant to us. Financial impacts can be significant. So Cresskill High School, New Jersey, suffered nearly $22 million in damage overnight because of that excessive rainfall. In that same year, U.S. saw about $92 billion in private insurance payouts related to catastrophic damage in 2021. That's according to the Insurance Information Institute. That number has basically gone up every single year. And that's a drop in the bucket compared to the overall damage. Because in that same year, Hurricane Ida caused about $75 billion worth of damage. It just wasn't remotely even close to all insured. Even if you don't talk about the primary damage itself, you will feel the effects. CBRE also studies this stuff. They have an ESG and real estate report that comes out, points to some of these increased costs. We also have seen utility costs go up, especially in New York State, where there's significant, there's a question mark over the long-term use of like gas. They're considering banning gas appliances. They're considering going all electric. All of these things factor into our utility costs going up, and they're all related, partially at least, to these changes in severe weather and climate. We suffer higher highs, lower lows, and bigger temperature swings as well. That just makes it more expensive to heat and cool buildings and less efficient. And that ability is way past the severity of that, I should say, is way past our ability to like engineer our way out of. There's lots and lots of improvements that people have made to heating and cooling buildings, being more energy efficient, but those temperature swings are more severe than you can just automate your way out of. Insurance premiums, and you guys have probably seen this in your own life, continue to go up. Basically every quarter since mid-2017, we've seen insurance premiums for basically everything go up by double digits. That's a good indicator that there's more risk in basically any system. We've seen that happen in homeowners insurance. We've seen it happen for auto. And certainly when it comes to schools, commercial buildings, bigger buildings, they are really feeling the effects of those premiums go up and up and up as risk increases. And the disasters themselves, if I pull general like ServPro data, because I have my own, like I can look at across the ServPro system, which there's 2,000 plus franchises in US and Canada, so it's quite a bit of data. If I just drill down to New York State, your average like water loss is going to range. Anybody have any guesses? Like a flood in a commercial facility, how much it costs to remediate? No. Your low end, you're looking at maybe 10,000, but it's closer to 45,000 if you get closer to like New York City. It's really getting to be more expensive, and that's not just because the actual work is more expensive. If anything, our prices have kind of stayed the same. They're set to a degree by the insurance companies because we use the same software, and those prices stayed stable. But associated costs in terms of material cost to rebuild, increasingly strong regulations around asbestos, other sort of regulated materials, the need for increased levels of abatement, stuff like that. All of these projects have become more expensive. We're talking about schools, though. We're not talking about just investment properties. And one of the biggest costs turn out to be opportunity costs, too. If you lack the resources to chase multiple sources of relief when you have a big disaster, you do suffer for it. Generally, a smaller, poorer district, and this is a quote from a state education official that wanted to remain anonymous, but smaller and poorer districts are often just trying to survive. They have difficulty documenting their recovery process, maintaining appropriate records, both of which are necessary to receive recovery funding. So the smaller that district is, the harder it's probably going to get hit. It may have an older building, it may have deferred maintenance for longer. In addition, they probably don't have the administrative resources to properly document the recovery process and be made whole. It's just worse and worse and worse. So the potential cost is great, and just putting together that necessary info to receive proper payment from your insurance, if FEMA's involved from FEMA, can be beyond a lot of school districts. And even schools that do receive that aid often report pretty massive shortfalls compared to the actual price tag of recovery. Multiple reasons for this. Insurance payouts are a good example. One of the schools that the GAO studied in that school flooding study, they had $6 million of damage. They could only get $1 million from their insurance, and the rest they had to come up with. And mostly that was because of depreciation. They hadn't paid for replacement cost insurance. So instead of getting paid for replacing all of this stuff based on what it actually cost, it was all depreciated. And it was depreciated over the course of 20, 30 years, depending when they used those building materials. So they had $6 million of damage and could only get $1 million paid out by insurance. Schools do tend to be underinsured and unequipped to deal with major disasters. Presskill, again, good example. They had $21.6 million in damage. They had a $2 million insurance cap. There's another school that had $30 million in damage. They found out their policy limit was $10 million, and then the insurance carrier brought out their own structural engineer and declared the building was a total loss and that they wouldn't pay to replace it at all. That in itself wouldn't be so bad, except for the fact that dealing with government agencies, which are supposed to make up these shortfalls, is really tough. It's that same school. FEMA sent out their own estimator to try to make up this difference, right? Okay, your insurance carrier says this is a total loss. They won't pay for you to rebuild. Let's send out a FEMA estimator and see if they can help us meet in the middle. They believe that it could be done. It was $30 million in damage. They said that they believed it could be fixed for just over $1 million. So that's a $19 million gap the school had to come up with because of all these issues, all these discrepancies, the difficulties of dealing with insurance, with government agencies, documenting all this stuff. It's not easy. It's not just like snapping your fingers and saying, here's my bill, where's my money? And if that school thankfully had the resources to bring in FEMA, to bring in structural engineers, chase all this down. A lot of schools couldn't even have gotten that far. They just don't have the resources to do it. So the financial part of this equation of disasters, even small ones, can be pretty scary for that reason. You assume you have insurance. You assume you have government aid. And when the chips are down, those people aren't really always incentivized to help you that much. And you can deal with a pretty significant shortfall. Say you do get that funding. What does the actual physical recovery look like? It is rarely smooth sailing in a significant disaster. Same GAO report, 80% of those schools that were surveyed were still in the midst of their repairs 5 years after the disaster. Partially, this was just because there was such a large scope of work for most of them, but main culprit for them were administrative delays and delays in funding. They could not basically get people to agree about what needed to get done, and schools kind of famously move very slow. If any of you are coming to my water damage class, which is, I think it's called catastrophic, gross, and both, there's a pretty significant water damage section. We talk about how slow schools move and how much that turns into them shooting themselves in the foot. To cope with these long timelines, students either had to relocate for years sometimes into temporary classrooms, or they had to work around repair projects. It was very disruptive. One school had to relocate about half their students to an old high school building 11 miles away. Unfortunately, their students were elementary school students, so they had to, before they could even start the repairs on their building that was damaged, they had to retrofit this entire high school to be able to house kindergartners and first graders. 8 months just to get it up to code, and the students were basically in sort of temporary, feeling half-finished classrooms for 8 months to a year. So sum total of all these costs, right? The emotional, the academic, financial, the physical, is a school environment that survives but doesn't really function. Cannot effectively fulfill its place as role as a place of learning and a place of refuge for students, especially when you're dealing with, like I said, poorer schools, smaller schools, low-income schools, especially for kids with special needs who can't really effectively be taken care of over Zoom. Despite the fact that there's more severe weather, especially flooding, there's been little widespread investment in updating school buildings to mitigate these risks, creating more accessible sources of funding for aid. There have been a couple of laws passed. There's the Resilient America Act. There's FEMA's Speed Recovery Act. These basically open up more sources of funding and try to make it easier for schools to get it, but they haven't really solved some of the core problems with the reimbursement or administrative processes. So what do we do? Up till now, we've kind of been setting the stage for this question. We established that disasters can come out of nowhere, potentially. They can knock a school out of commission for years at a time. Obviously, that is rare, and hopefully that doesn't happen here ever. But it can happen. And like I said, floods are bad, and fires can be pretty significant if they spread inside a school. And I have another class specifically paired in with that water class I just mentioned. We talk about fire as well. But overall, these types of catastrophes, as well as just more mundane disasters, your pipe breaks, your backups, whatever, are going to become more common. There are significant costs that most districts in a real catastrophic situation cannot shoulder on their own. And past that financial burden, the costs to the students, the staff, the community are pretty significant. Mental, emotional, just the disruption to their lives can be really rough. It's bad stuff. So what can you do? This is Reinhold Niebuhr. He's an American theologian, very popular in the mid-20th century. If you don't know who he is, you probably know the Serenity Prayer, which if you don't know the name of that, you probably heard it. Basically, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That was written, I think it's interesting to note, published in 1951. That's like right at the onset of the Cold War. And he was speaking to a new widespread anxiety that people were starting to face. This feeling that there were events happening that were completely out of the average person's control but could have a drastic and sudden effect on their lives, a.k.a. getting nuked into oblivion. We talk about the increase in catastrophes. We talk about the possibility of catastrophes, the feeling that this sort of thing could happen here. You can start to feel that same sort of anxiety. And we have to remind ourselves that maybe that core problem is beyond our reach. We can't stop severe emergencies from happening, but there's still concrete things that we can do as individuals to protect ourselves. I'm going to talk about specifically preparedness today, and again, in other classes, I'll talk about maybe some more practical steps, especially with water. But today, we'll spend kind of the rest of our time talking about emergency planning. I would imagine every single school has some sort of emergency plan in place. Do you guys see that plan? Are you privy to that plan? Is that something that you're trained on? Yeah. Cool. Generally what I ask when I'm talking to school districts is like, who put that plan together? Where's it stored? What does it look like? Who has access? What is it entailed? How often is it reviewed in practice? Because what I find is those plans are typically like this thick, like really gigantic binders of material. And they cover all sorts of things, all of which are important, but can be kind of hard to use something like that in an emergency situation, especially water damage that we're talking about. I'm not asking these questions to be skeptical of those plans, but there are some common pitfalls that kind of need to be mitigated, because real effective emergency planning can make a huge difference. Maybe you can't stop a flood through your school's vents, but you can, with a couple of really basic activities, mitigate water damage significantly. You can mitigate fire and soot damage significantly. You can stop the spread of moisture when it comes to mold, things like that. FEMA has statistics on the importance of emergency planning. It's focused on businesses, but just to kind of underscore the importance of it, according to them, about 25 to 40% of businesses fail after suffering any kind of disaster that causes disruption. A good chunk of them never reopen. Organizations that tend to survive and get through these things effectively have an effective plan. What does an effective plan look like? Two very good sources on this. One is BOMA. I'm on the board of the BOMA chapter here, so I'm kind of biased. It's the Building Owners and Managers Association. They have a guidebook on emergency planning. It's about 174 pages. It covers all sorts of things. It's really useful. Second source here, a sample school emergency plan developed by FEMA for training purposes. BOMA has FEMA beat in terms of expertise, but FEMA's done a great job of kind of localizing this stuff to schools. So by combining both of these things, we can kind of get an idea of what works best in a school. This is a pretty broad topic. This would be a full-day class probably to dig into these things, but I can tell you they identify 4 major pitfalls to most emergency plans that need to be mitigated, specifically when we're dealing with natural disasters. Number 1 is they find that these plans are generally not comprehensive. And I don't mean that comprehensive in the sense that they cover every single contingency. That's kind of impossible. It's not even desirable, because that would make that plan almost impossible to use. But they generally do not cover the entire life cycle of an emergency. I actually met recently, it's not in here, but I met recently with the Red Cross, and they sort of went over the same thing, which was interesting to see. When you think of emergency plan, you generally think of dealing with the emergency in the moment. Things like evacuations, the immediate response, all that, and those are really important. But according to FEMA, BOMA, and I'm going to throw the Red Cross in the mix here, that's about a quarter, 25% of what a good emergency plan should entail. They say effective emergency planning should have 4 parts. First is mitigation. How are you preventing and reducing damage? Preparedness. How are you actually preparing? What supplies are you stocking? How are you practicing these plans? Response. How are you actually responding when these chips are down? And recovery, and this is the one that people miss most often. How are you limiting disruption? How are you enabling continuity of operations? How are you getting things back to normal? Even things like how are you, and this might be beyond the scope of what you would do on a day-to-day basis, but how are you like communicating with the media? When journalists show up and they want to shoot a bunch of shots of damage and put it on Channel 4, what are you saying to them? We'll get into each of these sections in a moment, but an effective plan should have all 4. Number 2, and I imagine this is less of a problem with school districts and then property developers, but they often found that plans are not building specific. They're pretty general to an organization, and this can be a real oversight. Say there's a section in a plan that's supposed to talk about what you should do if a pipe breaks, which to me it happens all the time. I get a call about a pipe break basically every single day. Does that plan show you specifically with pictures where that water shutoff is? Does it show you how to shut off the main? Does it show you how to manipulate that particular pipe? Or does it just say shut off the water? That's a huge difference between those two things. A lot of plans stop with shut off the water because they assume that the person who's going to be best suited to do that is going to be able to fill in the gaps on their own. They assume it's going to be a maintenance engineer or something, or a head of facilities. I can tell you that it is rarely the case that that person is available and present when damage happens. I would point again to Winter Storm Elliott. I had a lot of people call me Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and say, I cannot get to my building because of the driving ban, and I have a security guard there, and I don't know how to tell them how to shut off the water. People who had emergency plans that I could walk them through, I was able to help them shut off the water. People who didn't have a plan that was specific to their building, I could jump on FaceTime with a guy and try to help them, but it was not always all that effective. Number 3, and this is a biggie, emergency plans are not accessible. Like I said, most of them are printed in binders that are this thick. Not many people could probably, and you guys can tell me I'm wrong, I'd be curious to know if I am, but how many people here could access their school emergency plan sitting here right now? Not really. All right. Is it like stored on a cloud or how yeah, that's awesome. That's good. That's exactly what you want. Effective emergency plan, especially that response section, should be accessible to anyone who needs it. Standard, obviously, in 2023 is cell phone. If you're able to get it on your phone, or even ideally, if you can whip open your laptop and get it, having access to that when and where you need it is really important. And that can be A, because you don't know what you're going to be responding to when or who's going to be responding to it. But B, say you are the director of facilities and you're on vacation in Aruba and someone calls you and asks you what to do, having access to that plan from your vacation in Aruba may be necessary. Or, like I said, during Winter Storm Elliott, being able to access something via an app or somewhere cloud-based so you can direct a security guard or whoever's on site to deal with the immediate damage, really important. Number 4, not usable. And you'd think that people put all sort of blood, sweat, and tears in these emergency plans. They would be useful. That's not always the case. Because, again, when you're in a crisis, you're not thinking in chapters and paragraphs. You're not thinking in jargon. You were probably thinking in bullet points, if at all. But a lot of these plans are written in very dense language. I think this is a picture of Charles Dickens, because Charles Dickens famously was said to have been paid by the word. So he wrote millions and millions of words. And a lot of plans are written this way. They should be made to be as simple as possible. No simpler, to paraphrase Einstein. Otherwise, they're not going to be of much help when you need them. So those are the 4 pitfalls that FEMA, BOMA, Red Cross, and I can tell you from practical experience I have seen with emergency plans, people just kind of, when the chips are down, they just throw them out because they're so hard to use, or they don't have access to them, or they're not all that helpful in the end. If you can avoid those 4 pitfalls with your emergency plans, you're probably on the right track. It's a tough part, obviously. It's kind of overwhelming to do that. There's an element of discipline and expertise necessary for emergency planning and preparedness. It's complex, it's a time suck, and I'm sure all of you are being asked to do more with less than ever before. So the idea of learning, developing, and training on something like this is probably not on the docket. Closest thing I have to a pitch for you is I can help you with this. Again, I work for ServPro. I look like a dork in this picture, I'm realizing now. My job is not extracting water. It's not cleaning up after fires. I do those things, but it's mostly about forming relationships. In this context, that means a few things. I specialize in emergency planning. I have a couple at my trade show table if you want to look at them. If people don't have plans, I generally help them create one. In a school environment, I mostly help them digitize certain parts of that plan and develop certain parts of that plan into something that would be useful in a water or fire situation. Get that on the cloud, get it in an app, and get it so people can access it. When I have that, the second thing I can offer is a higher level of service, because if you have that plan, I can guarantee that when disaster strikes, you're going to be better prepared than like 99% of people. But it also allows me to respond much more effectively. I would treat somebody who has a plan like that as sort of a VIP customer. They get priority response because I know what I'm going to be dealing with, and I've gotten all the administrative stuff out of the way to respond. This is really, really important. And again, I don't want to harp on Winter Storm Elliott, but the value of being a VIP matters. There was a direct correlation. I had over 500 calls to my franchise in just our 2 locations because of Winter Storm Elliott. Some of these were relatively small issues. Some of them were massive multi-million-dollar projects. There was a direct correlation between the people who I had spoken to before, who had written a plan, who had my phone number, and the people who got service. And that's sort of a harsh reality, but it's true. Because no company in this area, and really in the world, is capable of servicing everyone at once when there's a major storm. ServPro comes pretty close. I called people in from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York City to help. And we were able to get pretty close to that, but most people cannot do it all at once at the drop of a hat. So having a plan and having a priority service agreement in place because of that plan enables you to be served when a major event happens and not get dropped down to the bottom of the list, waiting for somebody to come out and extract water, dry out your structure while secondary damage is occurring. And I want to be very clear on this next point because nobody believes me. All of this is a totally free service. It's an investment for me. And it's for a very simple reason. Obviously, I want you to call me if something bad happens. But I also want to form a relationship with people based on partnership, based on mutual trust. And I think you guys will all agree what's a better way to start a relationship? By getting to know each other, getting agreements down in writing based on what you need, figuring out priority areas before something happens, or, as often happens to me, getting a 3 a.m. phone call from somebody who's saying, like, you up? Like, I need you here now. That happens to me a lot. My wife does not like it, but that happens to me a lot. I make both of those scenarios work because it's my job to make both of those scenarios work, but it is far more effective and frankly affordable for everybody involved to have done the pre-planning first, to have a relationship, to know what we're getting into, what we need, and how to help you. And that starts the plan. So my ask is, come by my trade show table. I will tell your fortune. I brought my wife's RuPaul's Drag Race tarot cards because I could not find a standard deck. But we can talk about emergency planning if that's of interest to you. It takes all of 10 or 15 minutes to figure out if it's useful, and it takes about an hour to do. And then two things could happen. One is nothing bad ever happens. You don't need the plan. Two, if disaster strikes, you will be ready. You don't even need to call me. I wish you would, but if you have somebody you like better, they're serving you right, that's great. You can still use the plan. That's my info. If you need me. And you guys are probably wondering what happened to Cresskill High School, because that flood happened in 2021. That's the high school we started talking about. I can tell you. Late January of 2022, local community was finally able to put a referendum to vote. Because remember, they weren't allowed to just borrow money without a vote. So they put a ballot in place 4 months after the actual event, allowing them to borrow the $21.6 million necessary to complete the repair work. Most of that's going to be reimbursed by FEMA, has not been reimbursed yet. School reopened September 6th, 2022, so like an entire year later. Was not easy. They only got their certificate of occupancy a few days before they were set to reopen. They were kind of playing with fire. And the repairs are not finished still. The auditorium's still closed. All their media centers are still closed. Everything else is open, but they also have far fewer students because most of their students transferred, they moved, they did not want to have to deal with another year of Zoom. It's crazy. The juniors at that school, this is their first year of actually going to that school. So they're almost done with high school. They're more than halfway done. They'd never been inside the school itself. Hilariously enough, on the first day, you can see it rained, which is sort of like a real FU to these poor kids. But I think it's also important to note that the money that they got, that $21.6 million, is for replacement. It's not for improvement. So if this were to happen again, there's another hurricane, there's another significant rainfall, there's a good chance that these design issues have not been fixed and will not be fixed. This could happen again. Do I think that's likely? No. I really hope it doesn't happen. But that's sort of the hole you get into when you deal with these things after the fact, when you haven't preemptively dealt with, on their level, engineering issues, but even just emergency planning, you get into a hole with stuff like this. It's really expensive to deal with, and you spend a ton of money just to replace without necessarily mitigating core issues. But overall, it's a win for them. They survived Ida, they navigated the process, they got back on their feet, and that deserves some level of commendation. And I hope everything works out for them. And that is my time, and we are just about at time, so I can let you guys go, unless you have any pressing questions. All right, cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.